Okay, welcome everyone. Again, this is Joe Coletti, Urban Initiatives. And I want to note that the purpose of our California CoC Collaborative Applicant Alliance Leaders Strategic Meeting is to provide an opportunity for leaders, you, to share strategies that your CoC is considering to prevent the loss of funding for previously awarded permitted housing projects that will be ranked in Tier 2. Number 2, an opportunity to hear strategies that CoCs are considering. And number 3 here, to provide an opportunity for us to interact with one another concerning the above as a means of collaborative support. So I'm just going to go ahead and take a few minutes to set the stage before we begin to share. I would, as everybody is well aware of, that the NOFO states, as noted in number 1, no more than 30% of your CoC's annual renewal demand will fund permitted housing projects. Noted in number 2, after HUD selects all projects in Tier 1, then HUD will select projects ranked in Tier 2 in the order of project score. But what we are really concerned about is stated in 3A. If at any point HUD selects permitted housing projects in an amount more than 30% of a CoC's annual renewal demand, HUD will remove all remaining unselected permitted housing projects from that CoC's priority listing, recalculate their Tier 2 project score, and then continue selection, which is noted on page 91 in the NOFO. But at the bottom of this slide, I want to note the following, which is not in the NOFO, but from a reliable source. Last year, California CoCs were awarded more than $683 million in CoC funding, approximately 90% of which went to permitted housing projects. So that's why we are so concerned about 3A. I want to continue to set the stage by noting that the FY 2025 NOFO describes 2 options that we need to be strategic about in order to prevent the loss of funding for previously awarded permitted housing projects that we will rank in Tier 2. The 2 options are reallocation and transition grant. Thus, the primary focus and purpose of our strategy meeting is to provide, again, an opportunity for you, collaborative applicant leaders, to share strategies that your CoC is considering about the 2 options, reallocation and transition grant. We also have an opportunity to hear same, similar, and perhaps somewhat different strategies that our statewide CoCs, all of you, are considering about the 2 options, reallocation and the transition grant. By way of reminder, for most, if not all of us, regarding the reallocation option, I just wanted to note numbers 2 and 3 that are in bold. HUD CoCs may only reallocate eligible renewal projects so long as the renewal project being reduced or eliminated has a current grant agreement and an expiration date in 26. And number 3, CoCs may apply for the following types of new CoC projects through the reallocation processes: SSO projects, including street outreach, TH, PH, PSH, and RRH. And I also just want to continue to set our stage by noting in regards to the transition grant option, just numbers 2 and 3. To create a transition grant through the reallocation process, the CoC must wholly eliminate one or more projects and use those funds to create the single new transition grant. And number 3, which is important because this one is different than reallocation. Number 3, for a new project to be considered a transition grant, the new project applicant must be the recipient listed on the current grant agreement for the eligible renewal grant being eliminated. So with that now, I feel like I've set the stage apart from just noting the following. The need for strategic approaches. You are encouraged to share what your CoC is considering about the reallocation option and the need for a strategic approach, transition grant option, and the need for a strategic approach, and perhaps to share some other strategy or some aspect of a strategy not yet shared. So you are also encouraged to ask or respond to any questions or comments as a means of collaborative support. So raise your hand to share what your CoC is considering, and also raise your hand to ask or respond to questions and to make or respond to comments. Now, while talking with Tanya from Riverside CoC, and I see that she's on the phone, and Zulima, Orange County CoC, and Jenny, the Pasadena CoC, and talking with the three of them last week, I asked them to share their strategies first. And then after them, please again, raise your hand to share your strategy or to ask any questions or make any responses with that. So I now want to call on Tanya to go ahead and share your strategy. Tanya, Riverside County. Sorry.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you again for bringing us together. We certainly need more opportunities where we get to discuss strategy and work together more than ever, right? It's really important that we remain united. So I'm definitely eager to get feedback from you all. I will share that in Riverside County, the county serves as the collaborative applicant and CoC lead agency, as well as the CES and HMIS lead agency. And so I think that's important, just because I know configuration can vary. We all look very differently. And yesterday, we actually met with our CoC Board of Governance. We scheduled a special meeting to discuss a strategy that we felt would position us to have or submit a very competitive application for this year's NOFO. That strategy includes reallocating all of our existing projects. And before you really get nervous about that, I want to share that we're really looking at our response, our application from a systems-wide lens. And in that, I will share that our strategy is looking at all of the individuals and families that are currently served, which across our region with HUD CoC funds is 640 households, 887 individuals, many of them veterans, many of them families with children, many of them are people who are senior, 62 and older, are HIV positive, have a substance use disability, et cetera. And so we're beginning to break out individuals by category so that we can work with all of the agencies that we contract out with to administer HUD CoC grants on transition plans for those that are currently being assisted. But so the board approved the reallocation of all of our existing projects with the plan to move forward with creating all new projects that align with this year's NOFO. That means that we'll be looking to create new permanent housing projects at the 30% cap that the federal government is giving to serve individuals who have who meet the criteria, right, that have a physical developmental disability and are elderly, as well as creating new transitional housing and supportive service only projects. In some ways, or I should say, I think an advantage we feel in doing it this way is not only will it allow us to make sure that we're, dotting our I's, crossing our T's, and creating programs that will give us the most amount of points, but it also allows us to buy some time as far as finding vendors or working with our local agencies to we would be releasing a local RFP, which we would normally do now, and under such a tight window, whereas we don't even know or have the CoC application questions even available yet. Our plan is to submit, prepare new projects, submit the application on January 14th. And then in February, we would submit a local bid application and work with agencies who would apply to administer, operate those new projects that we created. So that's how we intend to buy time, because we all know or realize that, right, the timeline itself is just not in our favor. And if we did open up a local RFP now, we'd only be giving agencies 2 weeks at best to turn those around. And that's just a real heavy administrative burden to carry. So we want to shoulder that. And going back to sort of our contingency planning for clients, again, really looking at all resources that we have as a county, but certainly even our city partners have, really everything in the ecosystem to see if we can, as an example, transition existing families to CalWORK's housing support program, or for veterans that are currently being assisted to HUD-VASH. So I'm just using examples. We've had conversations with our county behavioral health department. All that to say is we know that there will be some gaps now that we haven't fully accounted for and that we're nervous about, but we're going to be working very, very closely, case conferencing with our agencies to make that happen. Now, if we are successful in, bringing in the full amount of resources, that's our goal, to Riverside County, which will be announced in May or June as we understand it, then of course a strategy will be on, working closely to see how we might be able to transition existing clients to those new projects. But right now our goal is like, how do we just bring down the most amount of resources as possible? So I hope I did a good summary, Joe, but certainly open to answer any questions. Thank you.
Yeah. We have time maybe for a couple questions or comments for Tanya. Anybody? Raise your hand. And Sophia, Urban Initiatives, will call on you. Anybody? Kimberly.
Hey, Joe. Tanya, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So you're actually writing the CoC is applying for all of the funding. There won't be individual project applications. I guess I'm trying to understand how you're not doing a local NOFO.
Yeah, so the CoC, you're right. So yes, the CoC is going to be writing the application. We're going to be creating new projects. We will be releasing what's equivalent to like a letter of intent. In our county, we call it a request for information or qualifications, where we would be looking to measure interest and begin to sort of connect the dots as far as what experience existing providers have in administering these new projects that we're going to create in the next week or so. But yes, we would create the new project, and then once we submit our application in February, we would then be releasing a local RFP to actually identify
Okay,
right vendors that would operate those projects. Yes.
thank you.
Jonathan Russell?
Thanks. Yeah, and sorry, just might be also a clarifying question that thanks for asking, Kimmy. That was one of my questions as well. Are you just to confirm, you're talking about all of your potential annual renewal amount, not just tier two, but tier one as well? Like you're creating all new projects? That's
That
the
is
first question.
correct. That is correct. Yes.
Okay. And I guess I'm curious, why in terms of not plug in some that seem to comply that or might in terms of tier one, in terms of sort of populating that with, whatever existing permanent housing projects that would not be subject to new constraints potentially as tier one. Is there any thinking as to kind of why you're redoing everything?
Yeah, it's really in an effort to, of course, we don't have the questions yet, but looking at the scoring rubric that is attached to the NOFA of like, how do we make sure that we build projects that will allow us to maximize on the full set of points that are available. And then also in wanting to really I think when we look at all of our projects, that you're right, there are many that have some components that could qualify, but there really doesn't appear to be one that would fully has everything that it needs. So we just see this as an opportunity to look at, okay, can we create all new projects and like I said, really sort of lay out all the clients that are currently being assisted and match them up to this the new projects that are being created. So I think in short, it's really more of the first answer of, we just want to make sure that all of our projects are fully aligned and will get us to an 100% scorecard, if that's even possible, right? I know that's really ambitious, but that's really what we're hoping to do.
So then we want to get the Jet and Zulima, and then Zulima, a quick question on your end, because we want to get to you, and then after you, Jenny, and then we want to have time to let others share their strategies as well. So, Jet?
Yeah, so I mean, I think this sounds like a very clean way to approach this puzzle. Can you talk a little bit about the conversations that you had with your, we have several, what I refer to as the legacy CoC providers, those providers that have gotten CoC rapid rehousing dollars or permanent supportive housing dollars year over year over year. How did you get them as part of the CoC board to agree to this method?
Yeah, I'll be honest. It's where we started with them first. So we reached out to every single agency, met with every single director. And I think because we've been sort of operating in this way, sort of like from a systemic regional way for some time and using HAP grants, it sort of made the conversation easier because every agency understood there was a lot at stake. And that we needed to do, we needed to do whatever we could to bring down the full, in our county, right, we're eligible for 22 million when you count ARD and all the bonus funding. So I think the conversations with each of the nonprofits really were, we understand that HUD is not plain. It could be our also, right, when in 2012, when there was the shift from transitional housing to permanent supportive housing, our CoC was one of one of maybe few or many that still included transitional housing projects in our ranking, and we lost a significant amount of resources. And so I think that resonated with a lot of the agencies, and they said we cannot do that again. And then I think the other plus was, they're still going to be helping us put the application together as part of the RFI process. We're creating a sort of ad hoc committee, and so the CoC those will be able to help us sort of develop those new projects. So I think that definitely helped. And then I think there was sort of like a weight lifted because they were, as we are, right, sort of anxious about having to turn around project applications in such a short period of time. That was interesting, right? But they were just like, many of our nonprofits serve in Orange County, serve in LA, and so right, they're working on like 4 or 5 applications. And so Tanya, you're telling me that you're going to do a local RFP in February, and we'll have more time. That's great. Let's do it. So yeah, that was kind of our experience.
So Zulima, do you have a quick question for Tanya, or do you want to just go ahead and jump into your strategy?
A little bit of both. And I'm so sorry. I have been dealing with laryngitis all week long. Somebody asked a question about why would you consider reallocating all your projects? I wanted to point really briefly to page 55 of the NOFO and note that item number 5 notes that HUD may reserve the right to review past performance and eligibility criteria. And if there's any evidence that a project has previously supported kind of like racial preferences or gender equity kind of practices, that they may be considered non-compliant and not funded as a renewal. So in our CoC, and kind of segueing into our strategy, in our CoC, we have asked our current CoC funded agencies to review the NOFO really closely and to think through, would you be more competitive as a new project or as a reallocated project? And really looking through the point structure within the NOFO to see where they can lean into some of the strengths of their program and maybe eliminate and mitigate some potential risk. So I just wanted to note in terms of Tanya's presentation, like right here on the NOFO, we have all answered questions about promoting racial equity. We have also answered questions about non-gender discrimination. And I don't know if HUD will potentially take that approach as saying that we completed these practices. In terms of the Orange County CoC strategy, I would say that it's a little bit different. We have actually been meeting with our CoC funded agencies to talk about like their priorities and what they would like to see happen in our CoC as a system and as a community. And they have really agreed that this has to be like a systemic and community approach as opposed to like a cutthroat competition, how it typically is. So we are actually kind of facilitating discussions in which we have shown our ARD and all of our renewal projects and the renewal amounts. And our office proposed kind of like an initial set of recommendations that would trim our permanent housing allocation down by like 9 million. And we said, okay, like this feels like the quote unquote easiest way to like reallocate projects. And we provided some recommendations in terms of how we think these projects can shift and still be really meaningful to our community, either as SSOs or transitional housing programs. The CoC providers have kind of like taken that into consideration and kind of been like mulling it over. So like thinking about how they could potentially propose a new project. On Monday, December 1st, we're all coming together. And the goal is that we are going to have a 2-hour meeting into we get down to 30% cap. So all of the organizations are looking at kind of figuring out where they can propose to shift some funding. Our biggest North Star as we have been going through this is wanting to ensure that households that have previously experienced homelessness and are currently housed don't return to homelessness. So we are looking at leveraging any potential county resources, both from the state and federal, what's available, whether it's anything that goes through our social service agency, if we're looking at BHSA, looking at housing choice vouchers, and also tapping into other public housing authorities for support. So that has kind of been our piece of like wanting to do this jointly. If at the end of like Monday's call, we're like down to like 35%, then we have kind of agreed that we're going to go cutthroat and follow the competition process, and whatever that 30% line is, the balance would be completely reallocated. For new projects, either through the reallocation process, we are writing our RFP in a way that prioritizes CoC funded agencies that willingly reallocated their programs in support of this kind of larger permanent housing strategy. So they kind of have like first steps for their money. And then we're going to have like a regular solicitation process, no preference under any DV and CoC bonus funding. We have been encouraging kind of everyone to look at existing programs and contracts that are in place that are office funds or other funds, and thinking about like what pieces they really like, and maybe looking to not recreate the wheel and borrow from those program models to propose new programs under SSOs or transitional housing. And it is going to be really, really tight competition. So we expect the RFPs to be open no longer than 2 weeks. And we're probably going to be holding about like 3 CoC board meetings in the month of December to kind of hit all the deadlines. In the event that we don't receive applications for all of our funds, we are probably thinking of submitting an application on behalf of the CoC as a collaborative applicant. But that's kind of like our back pocket strategy. Even with all these changes, there is a intent to pursue as much of the funding as possible. So with that, I'll pass it back to Joe.
Okay, thanks, Shalima. Okay, we have time perhaps maybe for 1 or 2 quick questions for Zulima before we go to Jenny Pasadena, before we open it up to everybody else to share. We want to make sure we have some time available. 1 or 2 quick questions for Zulima? Anybody? Okay. With that, why don't we go ahead? Jenny, Pasadena. And then
Thanks,
we'll open it up.
Joe. Yeah, thank you for the folks who preceded me. So we our goal is to preserve our HMIS grant and as much rental assistance funding as possible in Tier 1. So this will likely, we have a few different grants that have TBRA funding, and we'll likely have to partially reallocate at least some of those grants, and then one would be probably a straddle, and the but hopefully we can get at least a good portion of our rental assistance funding into Tier 1. And then we will make the transition grant process or application available to all of our renewals so that if they fall in Tier 2, they have the option to apply for a transition grant. But I know that at least some of them are already sort of questioning if that's something that they want to do. And if this NOFO's version of transitional housing is something that they're even interested in administering. There are a few things that there's still I still have questions about. And I don't know if anybody on the call has any answers to these, if you've maybe reached out to HUD or if you've heard or read this somewhere. One question we had was if we can use SSO standalone for people who are housed. We have some existing PSH projects where the only thing we fund is a small amount of kind of supplementary supportive services. And so, we could potentially apply for transition grants to SSO standalone for those, but I'm not sure if that would be allowable. And then The NOFO says two contradicting things about the eligibility of DV renewals for transition grants, and something I'm going to email HUD about, but I don't know if anybody else has already taken that step. In the very same section, it says in one sentence that DV renewals can apply for transition grants, and then a paragraph later it says DV renewals cannot apply for transition grants. So that's just confusing. So if anyone knows the answers to those, that'd be really helpful.
Okay, Jenny, just to be clear, if anyone's thinking about what you're asking, but to be clear, you are not using reallocation as an option. You are using only transition grant as an option.
Oh, so we're allowing our project like our applicants to decide basically if they are being, so the way it will go is the board will evaluate the renewal project applications that those were due to us last week. We had started that process before the NOFO came out. And then we'll make decisions about basically what will make it into the 30% permanent housing cap. And then for projects that don't make it in the 30%, they will give them the option to apply for a transition grant. But then they would likely fall in tier 2 where they would be less competitive.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Time maybe for a quick question or two for Jenny before we open it up to everybody else to share strategies. Okay. All right. Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah.
So why don't we go ahead and just open it up? And you're, as noted here on the slide, you are encouraged to share what your CoC is considering about the reallocation option, the transition grant option, or perhaps even some other strategy or some aspect of a strategy. So, okay.
I see a hand up. Jay Mendelson.
Hi, John Mendelson. We're in CA 511, which covers San Joaquin County. We're the HMIS lead agency and a subrecipient discharging a lot of permanent supportive housing grants on behalf of our CoC. Our strategy locally is to maximize our tier 1 with either a reduced or new permanent supportive housing project, as our biggest permanent supportive housing project covers about 50% of our ARD. We're allowing operators of existing permanent housing projects other than that particular permanent supportive housing project to transition into transitional housing projects. A lot of those rapid rehousing projects that are in our community transitioned from transitional housing to rapid rehousing back in 2012, 13, 14, whenever that original change was made that I think someone was mentioning in Riverside County. And we're also strategically reallocating some projects that would have a difficult time in making an easy transition into transitional housing and offering those up for new transitional housing or support services projects, because we recognize reallocation is going to be an important part of maximizing our points in the local NOFO. So we're kind of trying to embrace a strategic and all of the above approach. Not sure if it's going to work, but it's what we've come up with.
Arsene. Arsene with the City of Glendale, go ahead. We can't hear you, Arsene. So maybe while we wait for Arsenate, Joe, I see that there are a few comments. I see that Veronica Wilson had a comment. So Veronica, if you want to share what you wrote in the chat, be great.
Sure. I was just sharing that our CoC only has one renewal project, and it's a large PSH, formerly Shelter Plus Care project. And so we're going to reserve tier 1 for that. It's always been our highest scoring project. So we're just going to squeeze as much out of that as we can. And I just don't know what else to do other than reallocate the remaining of our ARD and hope we get some applicants for transitional housing. But I don't think we will. And I'm hoping we get some street outreach projects or something like that. But we just don't have many providers that are sophisticated enough to manage a HUD contract. And the expectations of it are just beyond the learning curve of what some of these small rural nonprofits do. So I'm worried we're going to lose it. And it just kills me having to do this.
Thank you.
One comment for Veronica.
Yeah.
Veronica, just so what you're saying is that you have a concern that you may not have providers willing to apply, through either the transition or the reallocation process to transitional housing or street outreach SSO.
Correct.
And if not, then you're going to wind up having to put your permitted housing, PSH or RRH, in tier 2, or at least some of it in tier 2, whatever doesn't fit in tier 1 and tier 2, and you're concerned you're going to lose it then, correct?
Yeah. Our tier 1 is equal to exactly 30% of our ARD. So that'll take up our full permanent housing allowance amount. And I guess it's kind of lucky it all fits in tier 1.
Oh,
But I'm just worried we won't have any tier 2 projects at all or any bonus.
okay. So somebody else want to go ahead and share your COC strategy as noted here?
Joe, I just wanted to see if Arsenate was,
Are you guys able to hear me now?
yes, we can hear you
Yay!
now.
Okay,
Thank you.
wonderful. Hi, everyone. Hi, Joe. Arsenate from Glendale COC. Pretty much we're doing the same thing as somewhat, Pasadena's proposing. We're going to try to save as much as our TBRA as we possibly can, the rental assistance program. But we were thinking, so we have a shelter plus care program. We were going to place that in tier 1 and then reallocate close to about 300,000 of unspent funds to a new project that aligns with HUD's funding priorities, serving the elderly, physically disabled. But we have to put HMIS in tier 1, I believe. Otherwise, we do run the risk of losing that project under tier 2. So if we were able to place HMIS in tier 2, we would actually be able to create a new PSH project, and it would still be within the 30% cap. And then all of our other projects, we have about 6 other renewal projects that are going to transition to a new project type, which will be transitional housing. 2 of our agencies are going to transition back to TH, because if you recall a few years, over a decade ago, they had to transition to PSH in order to compete for funds. So thankfully, 2 of those agencies are willing to transition to a new grant. But we wanted to just hear from some of the other COCs. Is anyone considering placing their HMIS project in tier 2 and ranking it as the number 1 project in tier 2?
This is Kimberly from Ventura. We're putting HMIS in tier 1.
You are, okay.
And this is John Mendelson from San Joaquin County. We are going to, I think, rank our HMIS as the first project in tier 2.
Okay.
This is Leticia with the Kings Tulare Homeless Alliance, and we're the collaborative applicant. We're going to put HMIS in tier 1, the first one. And right now we have CES as well right after HMIS, and we're doing a reduction, reallocating funding from those 2 projects. But if the rating and ranking team decides, that they don't want those two projects there, then we would have to go from there. But that's what we have right now. Thank you.
This is Jet Black Mertz with the County of Santa Barbara. We're considering pulling HMIS and CES out of the competition altogether and funding those with general fund because we have some concern about the gatekeeping that could take place if coordinated entry is held to the same immigration and disability standards that they're holding the other projects. And so we just feel we haven't received enough clarity around how HMIS and CES are going to be treated differently from other direct service projects. And so for our personal concerns, I think we may be funding those with general fund and not CoC funding.
Right. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Joe, I have seen some comments in the chat from Sacramento, also from Humboldt County, and I believe Jamie Spector around SSOs. So if you care to comment, any of you. Okay. Joe?
Okay.
Hi, sorry, this is Robert with Humboldt. Um, I'm surprised more folks haven't thrown this idea out, but we really don't have the luxury in Humboldt of funding our supportive housing with some other source. So we haven't decided on any firm plans, but my thought is to, do transition grant. We're at 91% permanent housing, by the way. So to do transition grants to get us under the 30% cap to move a bunch of PSH into transitional housing. And then on all these national calls, National Alliance and other folks have been saying that, well, you can't just, transfer your PSH clients into transitional housing because they're not eligible. They're housed. My take on that is Category 2 is eligible for transitional housing, and the folks that are remaining as the project transitions, they're going to still be in the PSH because they don't have other resources. They don't have anything to transition to. So they're going to meet the Category 2 criteria and therefore be eligible. And then, theoretically, you have to put them back through coordinated entry and somehow get the coordinated entry system to select them for the TH project so they can then keep their housing. I have a question to HUD to see if any of this is possible, because like I said, National Alliance, Home Base have both said, they think it's really stretching the regs.
Thank you, Robert.
I have a question around the transitions grants. We've been receiving conflicting information about what category those will fall in. We've heard that, yes, you can transition from permanent housing to a transitional housing grant, no problem. And then, yes, you can transition permanent housing to transition housing. However, that won't be recognized in the system as a non-permanent housing grant until the 2026 competition, because between now and then it would be in transition. So has anyone received any clarity around what applying for a transition grant means as far as which category it will fall in, permanent housing versus non-housing?
No, and I haven't received any responses for any of the questions we've left through AAQ. I'm wondering if anybody else has.
No.
I have not, but I've certainly been assuming that they would immediately, be outside of the cap, and I feel like Marbut made comments to that effect during the webinar when, people were asking him, what are we going to do? And he was saying a lot of these PSH providers can transition to transitional housing I mean, if they're, if that doesn't happen immediately, then, they can't.
Is the implication there, though, then that the same people, I understand the project could change, but it seems like the people couldn't go into the TH without becoming homeless again. So I guess I'm trying to, I realize we don't have clear answers yet, but it just seems that it sounds easy to say, oh, PH can become TH. I know there's nothing easy about it, but it just seems like that it couldn't serve the same people, that it would serve a different population. You'd still be faced with trying to find permanent housing for everyone that's in PH. Or am I
Yeah,
missing something?
yeah, I mean, that is the question. Like I said, my theory is, we're all freaking out because they're going to become homeless. Well, they're going to become category two before they become category one, and category two makes them eligible. So if you can configure your CES so that they get selected, then maybe it's possible. But I've asked that question specifically to HUD, like a lot of other folks have. They missed the webinar with Marbit. They were definitely recording it. I hope they release it. I know the
Yeah, I
Zoom
haven't
filled
seen the
up, so a
link.
lot of people couldn't get in.
Was that a HUD webinar?
Yes, there was a
Called
HUD,
it a webinar. It was like a HUD information session, right? Just them
Oh,
telling us about the NOFO.
right, where I'm told that the woman Caitlin is Marbit's intern, and who told us all that the vast majority of people in supportive housing don't need to be there.
oh God.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It
Okay,
was
so,
something.
okay, with all of that, thanks, Robert. Thanks, everyone, on that. So we got a little bit more time. I just want to encourage, perhaps, we got a little time for one or two more COCs to share the strategy that you're considering. Any other COCs want to share? Please raise your hand. I'll tell you what, while perhaps you're thinking about that, I'm going to go to this next slide. These are a few of my notes that I've made that are based on some conversations that I've had with some of you. When I noted above about some other strategy or some aspect of a strategy. Number one, only include RRH, the rapid rehousing in tier two, because rapid rehousing rental assistance can be up to 24 months. Maybe you put the permanent supportive housing only in tier one, and any RRH that doesn't fit in tier one, you put it in tier two, because if you do lose it, you can't transition it, you can't reallocate it for whatever reasons. At least you got up to 2 months to provide the rental assistance. That was one thing. And but another was, anybody want to comment about that at all? Anybody about number one before I go to number two? All right, number two is to submit a PSH or an RRH renewal applications in tier two and comply with many of the changes noted in the NOFOL, including the housing first, housing reduction, the projects, will remember they have to serve the elderly, individuals with physical disabilities, etc. So again, the idea here would be that, well, if I have to put a PSH or an RRH in tier two and we're not going to transition it, we're not going to, for whatever reasons, reallocate it, well, maybe we submit it, but answer as best as we can in terms of complying with the many changes noted in the NOFO. It was just another idea. And then one other is number three is to split your PH renewals. One half of our PH renewal remains. Jenny, hang on one second. One half of a PH renewal remains PH and the other half is reallocated or becomes a transition grant. So maybe you're splitting, so your tier two project isn't one permanent supportive housing project, it's a half of a permanent supportive housing project and a half of a transition grant or reallocation for transitional housing. Jenny.
So Joe, are you proposing, I guess, with
I'm not proposing anything. Let
well,
me,
with
yeah,
any of these, is the implication that the CoC would be including permanent housing projects that exceed the 30% cap? Is that?
no, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just giving some food for thought. I just wanted to share some thoughts that I heard others, who will remain unnamed.
Okay, but like for number 2, for example, I'm just trying to understand how these strategies would work. So for number 2, is the assumption here like that, because tier 1, of course, aligns with the permanent housing cap. Although, as we heard, Pasadena and other CoCs some of us are putting HMIS in tier 1. But is this saying like don't reallocate any of your permanent housing programs, or don't apply for transition grants for any of your permanent housing programs, but just keep them, stick them in tier 2, and then indicate that they'll comply with? Is that what this is?
No, this is not, I'm not saying anybody suggested to me that they would intentionally do that. I'm just saying if for some reason you had to do it, you just don't, you can't, you have one that you can't transition and you can't reallocate for whatever reason. I mean, there's some pretty big CoCs that has a lot of projects, so what do you do?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so that was the thinking behind that. Again, we have a few more minutes. Anybody want to jump in and share?
So in Kings and Tulare, we've been meeting every Monday for a couple of weeks trying to strategize. And so we'll utilize that 30% with renewals, PSH renewals. And we're trying to put the PSH that have scored kind of the highest in HMIS, which is really hard, trying to be not subjective, but we're using HMIS to show who scored a little bit higher in their system performance measures. And then those that are towards the end would apply for transitional housing. So they'd reallocate their PSH and just utilize that same amount in a transitional housing program. But I think agencies are a little concerned of just writing a new project within the time frame that we have right now. And we would just have to align with what the HUD NOFA requires for transitional housing. It's really difficult, but that's kind of what we're trying to do, is just change our PSH that don't fit into the 30% into transitional housing.
Okay. Quick question for Letitia, or somebody else want to share strategy? We got a few minutes left, just a few. Okay.
Well, just a further thought of what's behind my thinking on, transitioning PSH to transitional housing. Our grant cycle, we're lucky it doesn't start until October 1st. So we could be looking at a year to transition to transitional housing. So if we can figure out how to keep our same clients, the transitional housing period doesn't start until October 1st, 2027. They get 24 months of assistance, and that gets us into the next administration, or we could have fixes, perhaps.
Thanks again, Robert. Anybody else? We just got a couple minutes here. I know I'm just going to my next slide. We talked a little bit, were you going to ranking and risking HMIS and CES? I mean, if you put HMIS and CES in tier 2, one or the other, if you're risking it, right? And so, I mean, but some thoughts have been shared about that, right? I don't know if anything else wants to be said about that at all. With that, I just want to share with our remaining minute or so one thing that's totally unrelated. And that is because some of you have asked me about hey, do you have an inventory for the California CoC, for unsheltered counts? And so the answer is yes. I'm switching to the point in time count, which, believe it or not, right, is only a couple months away. Is that of us, the 44 California CoCs, just a little more than half conduct an unsheltered count, and thus a little less than half conduct an unsheltered count every other year. So if you were wondering about that, there's your answer at the moment. And I just added all this other stuff that's highlighted in yellow, just by way of reminder, is that HUD hasn't gotten anything out to us in regards to a notice, and an updated, document guidance. Last year on October 28th, 2024, HUD sent something. Then again, highlighted here, November 6th, HUD said something, and on November 20th, and again on December 4th, and here we are, November 25th, and we haven't heard anything from HUD in regards to that. So I just wanted to just lastly say, if you have a question or comment that you were unable to state, you are encouraged to post your question or comment on our California Continuous Care Collaborative Applicant Alliance interactive website. Many of you have used it. You're encouraged again. And if someone's question or comment is about something that you shared, you are encouraged to post a response to that question or comment on our website. Please know that a link to a recording and a transcript of our meeting will be emailed to everybody after the holiday. We will send out a link to a recording and a transcript. So let's continue to support one another as we have over the years, and let's plan on meeting again soon, virtually again soon. So with that, I just want to be able to say it's 3:00, and we just want to say, I don't know, hang in there. Let's see what happens next. Thank you, everyone.